Hi everyone, I'm Cyril Filias, the Bilingual Learning and Development Specialist at CERIC. And on behalf of CERIC, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. Today is the last webinar in our webinar series, and we are excited to say that we reached a dozen of registration coming from around the world. So that's awesome. And for our last webinar, we are delighted to have Reinekke Lengelle live today from her beautiful Alberta, who will talk about her career writing method from the CERIC book, Career Theories and Model at Work. But before Reinekke gets started, we would like to take a few moments to introduce you to CERIC for anyone who may be unfamiliar with our organization. CERIC is a charitable organization that focuses on education and research in career counseling and career development in Canada. We fund the development of resources like the Career Theories and Model at Work book in order to advance knowledge in the field. And bringing you learning opportunity like this webinar series is also a key part of our mandate. We are particularly excited about this book since it's a truly international collaboration with contribution from 60 of the leading career researchers and practitioners from 4 continents and 9 countries. Additionally, CERIC has 3 main programs: the Canexus National Career Development Conference held in Ottawa each January. We also have our careerrise.ca website, which features the top news and review in the field, and we have the Canadian Journal of Career Development, which is free to access. You can learn more about all of the CERIC work at ceric.ca. Now some just quick housekeeping notes. If during today's webinar you have any questions, please enter them in the question box you see on your screen, and Reinekke will respond to them toward the end of the webinar. At the end of the webinar, we will email you a copy of the presentation slide as well as a recording of the 3 webinars. We also encourage you to engage with this webinar on social media using this popular Twitter hashtag you see on your screen. And bringing the Career Theories and Model at Work book to life will not have been possible without the tremendous work of the 3 co-editors, Nancy authors, Mary McMahon and Roberta Note. And I'm delighted to have once again Roberta Note with us today. We'll say a few words about the book and we will introduce you, Reinekke. So over to you, Roberta.
Well, it's delightful to have the opportunity to introduce Reinekke. I'm thrilled to be able to do this. I'll tell you a little bit first about the book and then the process of inviting authors. This book I feel comfortable bragging about because I'm only one of 3 co-editors, and there were 43 chapters and 60 plus authors, so lots and lots of people contributed to it. But it's a text that has become really well received internationally, which is certainly demonstrated by 1,000 people registering for a webinar. I've never heard of that before in my life. And what's special about the book is that we reached out to authors of models and theories around the world and gave them very limited space to describe their theory, and they were only allowed 1 page of references. And that's very, very difficult for academics to stick to 1 page of references. And so the writing is very accessible. Then we asked them to write a vignette and to apply the theory or model to the vignette so we could see it in action, and then to end with a page of practice points so that the practice points can easily be photocopied. Usually we don't recommend that you photocopy pages out of a book, but you can have a cheat sheet right in front of you if you're trying to work with a new theory or model. This particular chapter is extremely special to me. When Reinekke will talk a little bit later about her co-author, Frans, but as we were inviting authors to write for this book, one of the people that I really wanted to reach out to was Reinekke, and yet I knew she was going through a really challenging personal time, and that Frans was unhealthy and not doing well. And so as editors, we questioned whether it was kind to reach out, whether we should reach out or not. And I'm so glad we did, because you just have an absolute gift in this chapter of a new way of looking at processing all sorts of transitional times in your life. So the focus here, of course, is on career writing, but I've also had the absolute delight to share with Reinekke over the last few months other writing that she's been doing, where we have shared together a life experience of actually losing a spouse and been able to walk through that process together through her writing. So I've known of Reinekke's work for years. I met with her and Frans many years ago, and have tried to find ways for our work to overlap. But this chapter is extremely special to me, given the circumstances it was written under, and then the really amazing opportunity that I've had since to share in another one of her writing projects. So I am delighted to be able to join in this webinar, and delighted to hear and learn from you, Reinekke, and just so grateful that you have shared so openly the process of writing and how it really can help us move through some pretty significant moments in life. So thank you, and I welcome you to take over here. Reinekke, there's a formal bio here that you can read. Should probably talk about some of the important stuff, but has a PhD, is a co-creator of this method of writing, teaches courses in several countries around the world. So certainly I'm familiar with her work in Alberta and the Netherlands, but in the bio in the book, it also talks about work in Finland and Iceland, and being special issues editor of a creative methods issue of the British Journal of Guidance and Counseling. So, you know, I respect you as an academic, but I respect you also as just an incredible author and a personal friend. So thank you so much for contributing.
Thank you so much, Roberta, for that warm welcome. Much appreciate that. So we're going to begin with some inspiration from Frans, and I hope I'll keep it dry here. So if you see me doing this, you'll know why. Here is my beautiful life and work partner, who died in November 2018, just 8 months ago. Frans and I met in 1993, and we worked together. As of 2007, we have been working together and created so many beautiful things. And his journey to the end of his life was also a beautiful journey. And so today I invite everybody to be joyful like Frans, because he was full of joy. And I think you can see that from the picture as well. He was a professor of career education at the Hague University. He was a charismatic and well-known speaker in the Netherlands, and later also in other countries. He ran his own research and consulting firm for over 20 years in this area. So he was always part academic, part businessman, and he was a real maverick. He also later became the symposium co-editor along with Deirdre Hughes at the British Journal of Guidance and Counseling. And his last issue, which is true to his life, is called the Happiness and Well-Being issue. And I recommend you have a look at that if you have time and the inclination. It's a beautiful issue of the British Journal of Guidance and Counseling. So Frans and I created career writing together. I've been teaching writing the self for many years, since 1996. I was teaching students how to access their inner world through writing and to do healing through writing. And I was doing that online and face-to-face. And Frans and I started working together. And of course, he was developing career theory, and he was very interested in identity formation. So it was sort of a marriage made in heaven, and work-wise, but also love-wise, we became partners, life partners as well. I'm going to, of course, I have a whole presentation prepared, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the history of us. But I do want to say that if you are interested in learning more about how career writing developed and how our careers developed, there's a new book chapter out with Springer in a book edited by Kubis Murray and Chris Wilby. It's the chapter's called Poetic Reflexivity and the Birth of Career Writing, an Autoethnographic Love Story. So I invite you to have a look there if you're interested. And I've also written a blog for CERIC about the final months of Frans and my life together, and how the principles that I'm going to be talking about today apply to any life challenge, not only career life challenges. And I hope that will inspire you. And Frans said this beautiful thing. This was kind of his motto in life, and I'm going to start the presentation really there. Is he would say, when something difficult happens in your life, or when you have a career question you're grappling with, or you feel your professional practice could be better, he says, don't ask what you should learn. Don't ask what you could learn. but ask what you would want to learn. So we'll start there with that bit of inspiration from this very joyful man who was both teacher, academic, and inspiration to many, many people. All right, and all true to all my presentations and all the presentations Frans and I have given in the past, we like to really have people experience a little bit of what we're talking about and not just hear about it. So I'm going to invite everybody to write down a career question or a life question that's been following you around. So please go ahead and do that. CERIC advised everyone to have their pen and paper ready. So please grab that now and just sit for a moment and write down a question that is alive for you at the moment. And we're going to work with this a little later. So just take a moment. I'm going to give everyone about a minute or so. You know, it may be a question that goes quite deep, like what is the next big step for me? And it may also be a question that is what seems to be a little bit more minor. For instance, you're sharing an office with somebody who's very messy and you're tidy and you do like the colleague, but you're thinking, how can I make this work better for me? That can also be a career or life question. So you can go deep or you can go, you know, to a place, something that's just alive for you in the moment. Yeah. And I do encourage you to put it on paper, even if it's a scrap of paper laying beside you. We're going to revisit this. Okay. All right. So everyone, I'm assuming, has their question written down. Okay. So there's a poll question here that CERIC will put up for you. I'm just curious about your background and what brought you here. Okay, nice to see. Okay, we want to offer students and clients more. Okay, there's not a lot of people in the group that already know about career writing. Good to know, good for me to know. All right, my next question. And just getting a sense of, again, of who's out there is what industry you're working in. And if you are just here for interest's sake, you can also choose for as a consultant to write of clients, because you might be also advising your friends with your wisdom. So you can fill that one in if you're not directly in the industry. Okay. Okay, so some higher education and especially in the private consulting with clients. Okay, good to know. All right, thank you. All right, I just want to briefly give the background of things, why career writing would be a method that would offer something new as opposed to some matching paradigms, et cetera. So what are the challenges that we're really facing? I'm going to briefly sum those up. Of course, many of you know those already as you're in the field, but I have some interesting statistics and thoughts on this that may enhance things you already know. So first of all, of course, the individualization of society. We know this over the past 30, 50 years that we've really gone from a standard biography to a more, to a more choice biography. Life has changed. Our parents, grandparents usually their lives were set out for them in many ways. They followed particular traditions that they were encouraged to follow through church or community. And a lot of that does not apply anymore. So the onus is on us as individuals to create a life that is satisfying for us. That's the individualization part of it. And then there's the insecurity. And I will talk about that in the sense of the gig economy, flexible and contingent labor. Interesting to know that between 1997 and 2015, there was an increase in flexible labor work from 4.8 million, this is in Canada, 4.8 million jobs to 6.1 million jobs in Canada became contingent labor jobs. A third of all jobs in Canada are flexible labor contracts, and 90% of the jobs created between 2015 and 2016 are actually temporary jobs with 30% less pay than those jobs had they been full-time permanent, for full-time permanent. So that is a really interesting statistic. Now, I like to always tell my own story very briefly about this. I spent 15 years teaching at Athabasca University on part-time contracts. I only became full-time permanent January 1st of this year. Yes, and somebody would probably say, okay, but you're now in, you don't have the insecurity anymore. Can you really relate to this? You have a strong career, etc. Well, I was, like I said, I was visiting graduate professor for 15 years. And I've sometimes said it is not fortitude or strength of character that got me through those 15 years of sometimes not knowing whether I was going to be working September 1st. You know, the contract would sometimes come at the end of August and for a September 1st start. And I said, it's not fortitude. It's not powering through. What it is a resilience and flexibility of mind that you cultivate by actually having a real dialogue with yourself, therefore a qualitatively better dialogue with others, and then again, a dialogue with yourself that is essential. So actually being in touch with your own thoughts, your own intuitions, actually will get you through some of the most difficult situations. Now, that's not to say that I'm in agreement with all the neoliberal things that happen in work, and but this inner strength that you can cultivate through processes like what I'm describing also allow you then to decide about taking social action, for instance. And then we did take action also on our insecure contracts at our university with great success. So the important thing is how are we relating to ourselves, to our stress, to our dreams, and to this profound insecurity that is part of our society now and part of our clients' life. I was recently presenting at Norquest College, and I asked a group of 60 participants there who has experienced insecurity in their work in the last year, and about 40 to 50% of people raised their hands saying, yes, I've experienced that in the last 10 years. So we see this a lot with our clients. Now, the third item here that I have on this slide is the complexity of society. Now, that's not only things like artificial intelligence that is going to affect 35 to 50% of jobs in Canada will be threatened as a result of automation. But think of this change. This is a fundamental change. In the 1970s, in the Central Bureau of Statistics in the Netherlands, they found that there were about 5,000 definable professions we can relate to, things like dentist, English teacher, these type of things. We know what they are when you say them. And there were, at that time, 1970s, there were about 2,000 vague roles, things like policy developer for the municipality. Somebody would say, oh, I don't know what you do. Can you explain? So there were about 2,000 of those vague roles. Well, this research was done again in 2012, again, the Central Bureau of Statistics in the Netherlands. It will be quite similar, I think, to here, our Western society. And what they found was that there were only about 1,000 definable professions left, things like dentist, English teacher, nurse, those type of things. And if you can believe it, 23,000 of those vague roles. Now, for instance, at my university, I have a lovely colleague, Lorna Brown. She, when she first introduced herself to me, she said, I said, so what do you do, Lorna? And she said, I'm a digital architect. And I loved the title. I thought it was very poetic, but I really didn't know what she did at all. So I had to ask her, and she named about 8 things that she does. So now we're faced with, imagine 23,000 or more of these vague roles. And if we're stuck in matching paradigms, how are you going to look at your skill set and combine them with the jobs out there when there is such a variety? So this is another reason why it's so important to know who we are in relation to that environment, as opposed to deciding that we're going to look at our skills and then try to match them out there. So this is about identity development. This is really about growing awareness And this is what we want to achieve. And this is what narrative approaches are meant to help us achieve. Okay. So the result of individualization, insecurity, complexity is that we are in what's called the boundaryless career in the risk society. It's not an easy place to be. Our living situation has become better in many ways in the last 50 years, but these are the risks that we run. So I'm just going to sum them up as we have fewer reliable templates. We need our own stories to shape our lives. Employers and jobs are no longer the places of security. And the matching paradigms within career counseling no longer suffice. They still, of course, apply, but not in the same way that we used to be able to use them in the industrial time. Okay. So what are employers looking for? Now, I did some research on this in early this year. I did some research on this when I prepared my presentation for the college here in town, and found that employers are looking for people that are proactive, creative, and relational. And you see this in a lot of job ads already. And so it's not only about the skill set, but it's about developing some of the what we call the soft skills as well. So the goal is we want to develop in our clients and in ourselves an ability to become more self-directed through self-reflection. Now, I have a lovely quote here by John Hagel of Deloitte. I have many inspiring quotes, but I happen to pick this one. So it's not deliberate that it's out of the business world. There are many that I could have picked from Mark Savickas, for instance, as well. So it will be a powerful catalyst to step back and identify the unique capabilities can harness as humans to differentiate ourselves, such as curiosity, imagination, creativity, and emotional and social intelligence. The things the school system is doing a bad job of nurturing and developing in us. So the other things are demanded of us and our clients than before. And how are we going to develop these things? What kind of personal development modalities can we engage with? Okay, just a little question here about what do you think self-reflection is? And there's not really a fully wrong answer, so this is not a trick question, but I will explain as the answer pops up in my presentation. Yes, you're quick studies, exactly. That's beautiful, and I appreciate the response. Interestingly, that a lot of the applications of reflection, as we see at the Hague University, which is a University of Applied Sciences, a lot of vocational training happens there, is that even though if you ask people directly to explain what self-reflection is and you give them a list like this, they'll pick out the third or fourth. But when they actually apply it in many ways, what they're doing is some of the first and second things. So that's why I asked that question. So the idea about career guidance in the 21st century, it's kind of stuck in the 20th century with a little bit of a 21st century thinking mixed in. So we're not there yet. First of all, there's very simplistic notions of what self-reflection actually entails. And educators know that it's important, and when they can define it, they say, okay, now we've defined it, but then how do we do it? So that's the question that then comes up. So self-reflection is a process of understanding oneself in relation to others and the environment in a way that is both felt and includes conscious thoughts. So emotions are important for learning, and conscious thoughts, to be able to actually observe your own thoughts is incredibly important. Now, those are things that we learn, for instance, in mindfulness training or meditation. And we can use writing as a way also to observe our own thoughts. Even the fact that when we put something on a page, we have a literal point of reflection. That distance between the eye and the piece of paper already creates an ability to start to observe our thoughts. So that's one of the reasons that writing can be quite powerful. So this is not about the informed career choice, but it's about developing the warm inner compass. And why do I call it warm? The reason I call it the warm inner compass is because our emotions are involved in all our choice making and our affective capacity. So for instance, Antonio Damasio tells this amazing story about a head injury of a man who lost that part of his brain where he could feel any affect, and he could not decide what he wanted for lunch. So that's just an example. We are constantly making decisions with our affective part of our brains and our bodies, as well as the sort of rational thoughts that also come in. In fact, a lot of our rational thoughts follow our intuitive decisions. We use our rational explanations later to say why we did something, which we actually were moved to do. And if we're able to be more conscious about what moves us to do and to choose things, then we can also make better choices, because it's important to reflect on those choices and not just shoot from the hip, as it were. Okay. Self-reflection. So the important thing when you think of self-reflection too is what is meant by the self. Now, I will take just briefly here, before I go further, I'll just want to say that the model of self that we use in our work was also talked about earlier this week in Michael Healy's presentation, his webinar on Tuesday. And Frans and I also use this model for looking at what is the self, who is the self. And the definition we use is a dynamic multiplicity of selves and positions in the landscape of the mind. That definition comes from Hubert Hermans, the founder of the Dialogical self theory. He's a good friend and colleague in the Netherlands. We've been working very closely with him on many projects. And yeah, he's a dear colleague. So it's important here to note that we do not have one voice that is speaking, but many voices, and those many voices can be resources for us. They need not only be the chatter in our heads or worries, they can actually be resources, creative resources for us in conversation. I'm just going to touch on that a little bit more, because when I bring up the dialogical self theory to people who have not heard of it before, this can be a little bit confusing conceptually. So I'll give you an example. When I miss Frans and I don't have him to speak with, and I don't have him anymore on this earth to work on projects with, sometimes I will sit down and say, Frans, I will write down, I'll say, what do you think of this? And knowing his voice so deeply, his external voice has become an internalized voice, and I'm actually feel like I'm able to speak with him. I even had one moment when I was putting together an article recently where I said, I wonder about the structure of this and that. And in my mind, I heard him almost saying, well, make sure to do this and make sure to do that. And he was encouraging, and he had some ideas about it, you know. So we can access all sorts of voices, or I positions as they're called, in order to inform us. So I've been writing, of course, I've been writing about bereavement now. I'm writing a project called the Widow Project, and I use external voices and dialogues and conversations with Frans to revisit some of the things in our lives that I would like some more clarity on, etc. So in that sense, he is not lost. And we can also do that with clients. When a client, for instance, comes in and has struggles with, say, not taking really good advice that you both discussed, and they've agreed on it, and they say, yes, I'll follow your advice, sounds good, and they walk out the door and they don't. And then you can have an interesting written dialogue between various parts of that client to see what might be going on. For instance, you might find that there's an inner I position that has fears rejection. You might find that an inner position feels that they're being pushed too quickly by a career counselor, for instance. Or there might be an inner saboteur that is at work. So if you have some writing exercises around getting those voices on the page, you can start to see, oh, I see, you know, the reason I'm not committing to anything is that deep down I have this I position, father position, who hated his job, who didn't wished he hadn't gone and spent 40 years doing that. And I'm so worried to commit to things. I feel like, what if I get locked in? So just the consciousness around an I position that's written down like that can reveal insights that can show, for instance, why a client is stuck and not pursuing very good advice that you have come up with together. Okay, I know we're covering a lot, and anyway, I look forward to your questions. I hope it's clear. So the narrative approaches, there are various narrative approaches. Many of you will have heard of life design, for instance. Mark Savickas is one of the most well-known narrative approaches. Of course, Mary May and Mark Watson have a narrative approach of storytelling. Bill Law had a storyboarding. He was from the UK, a very respected colleague of ours. So there's particular different approaches, and career writing, of course, is a writing approach, and we define it as a creative, expressive, and reflective writing exercises that help people to develop an inner dialogue, a conversation with themselves that can lead to new stories. And before I continue and explain the model around that, I'd like to say it's not just free writing. I don't actually do free writing with my groups at all. I will use things like proprioceptive writing. It's a method by Linda Tricher Metcalf and in the United States, and it's an expressive and reflective journal method. I recommend it. It's to really start to deepen our thinking, because often in writing, we will repeat ourselves. We will look at an issue we had 5 years ago and say, oh my gosh, I'm writing in my journal, and I see that 5 years later, I'm writing the same issue in the same way. So we need various methods to go deeper than that. I also have a pack of career cards with a whole bunch of exercises on the back, because we need various ways to access our own inspiration, and to have some structure around that. It really requires some structure. Otherwise, we will fall into the cycle of lament, as I call it. Some of the writing exercises I use is we do some fiction writing. Now that sounds intimidating, but all my graduate students, no matter what, and all my other students also at various courses I teach, even 17 to 20-year-old group that I've done can write fiction, and we find interesting life themes that pop out of the fiction that they write. And there's some guidelines around teaching to write little fiction stories. We also do poetry, but then the first time I will introduce poetry in a workshop, I will not call it poetry, for instance. I'll call it, we're gonna write a list, and we're gonna start with this sentence stem. And then we go from there, and then as people read it, they realize that they've written poetry. So it's wonderful to see. The other writing exercise that I found very powerful, and which we use in career writing as well, is Byron Katie's The Work. It's something that Michael Healy also mentioned. He had that on his webinar, The 4 Questions and Turnarounds. Because I want to say something about identity and story. Because in career writing, we define identity, career identity is the story you tell about your life. And I want to say something about that. I think it's very important in our identity development that we also let go of many identities that actually are not serving us. And the work allows us that. The first question, the work is it true? So we may, for instance, say, I'm somebody that never sticks to one thing. I like to try on a whole bunch of different things. But when you really question that deeply, you might find that you're actually have been wanting to commit to a particular thing, but you're scared of, for instance, scared of missing out sort of themes and scenarios. So the work is a way of stripping away particular narratives that we also tell about our lives. So equally important as to construct narratives about ourselves, it's equally important to also strip away narratives, things that really do not apply anymore to our lives, and things that may be actually blocking us. So, okay. Another poll question. What do you know about narrative methods so far? What have you heard about it and know about it? Okay, good to know, good to see the overall picture of narrative methods. So I want to say before I go on, narrative is just a fancy word for story. So please never be intimidated by the word narrative. And yes, there are researchers who will define it more finely, etc. All respect for that. But just know when we talk about narrative, we're talking about a structure of a story in some way. So again, don't be intimidated by that. Okay, next slide here. Self-reflection often begins with some form of challenge in our lives, because if we're not challenged, usually we're quite fine to use the tools in life and the coping strategies we already have. And so self-reflection almost always begins with some kind of question that we have where we feel like we're stuck or suffering, and we have an unhelpful story about it. So that's very human. Something happens, for instance, we thought we were going to get an extension on our contract and we didn't. Or we feel there's workplace injustice going on, and we don't know how we're going to situate ourselves with that. So that's often the beginning of our learning process, you know, this meaning-oriented learning process. So up on the top of this diagram, you see the boundary experience. It's a situation or event or attitude that really challenges us in some way, and it is the invitation to crack us open, as it were. And what do? Well, you can follow the arrows there. Just step with me through the model and don't worry about seeing the whole thing all at once, because it's a lot to take in. On the right-hand side there, you'll see the first story. So we're going clockwise around. The first story we tell about it is, oh no. So say that the boundary experience is not having your contract renewed at work. And then the first story is, oh no, this is terrible. Oh, it's not, oh, I can't believe the government cut the funding on that. Or I can't believe my boss didn't give me more notice. Those kind of things we usually say that are around, that are really in the victim mode. Now, these are very natural things to feel and to say to ourselves. And so there's nothing wrong. There's no judgment around having a first story. It's very human. Only thing is, if we stay in the first story, that's not helpful to us. So we want to slowly make our way to a second story, a more life-affirming story where we can actually feel like we can go on. And but we can't skip over to the second story. It doesn't work. If we did, it would be a rationalization. It would be of no use to us. So we have this first story, poor me, and we need to slowly work towards the second story. Now here you see the phases that we go through. I'm just going to highlight the ones on the left here is sensing and sifting. What we want to do is be encouraged to start to express all our thoughts and feelings around something that has happened in our lives. There are various writing exercises in order to do that. For instance, proprioceptive writing is a wonderful way to start getting out some of our thoughts and feelings. And so you see that we will slowly work with the writing exercise to take us through the transformational space. Those 4 phases, by the way, are from the work of Bill Law, the UK researcher I mentioned earlier. Those are learning phases that we go through in order to develop a second story. And the reason it's a circle like this too is, you see where the word transformational space is written. I always say it's kind of the underbelly. We need to go into the dark wood, as Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, would say. We need to go into the dark and into the place also of our emotions and our feelings and our affective realm. And again, poetry, fiction, there are ways that we can do that with clients. So the dialogue with others continues. That's like conversations with the career counselor. We may have friends, family, books that we're reading. Those are dialogues with others. And the dialogue with ourselves, which we can cultivate continually with writing if we like to do that. And that sort of chain in the middle of the model, that infinity symbol, that oscillating between internal and external dialogue, is kind of the dialogical motor which propels us slowly through the stages and allow us to develop insight for our second story that is therefore a felt story. So I'll give you just a very concrete example of somebody, they didn't have their contract renewed. Their first story is, oh, this is terrible. Oh my gosh, I'm stuck. And as they go through the personal development stages with writing, they might discover that it's not really the intimidation of finding a new job. They are creative enough to do that. But it's, for instance, some shame around rejection. So that might be one person's particular problem. Somebody else is not ashamed at all of being not renewed, but they have real financial concerns and have issues with flow of money, etc. So each person discover something unique about their own process in response to the event that happened. And so the second story allows us particular insights like, oh, I'm actually okay if I can grieve the rejection here. I know that I'll be fine to go looking online for other jobs and look at other opportunities. I'm actually quite excited about it, but what was holding me back in the first story was my own sense of rejection. Again, so those are the kind of insights that might be revealed as we work. Okay. Now, the little red portion here, you see, is actually the area in education that we underemphasize. We spend a lot of time maybe on focusing and understanding, which you see here, focusing and understanding, but not on the sensing and sifting phase. And that's actually something we found in education. There's such a difficulty when students, for instance, express emotions to actually work with that, but those are such important elements in the parts of the story to find out which parts of the story are actually salient for the client, are those emotions, and for the students. So career writing actually invites facilitators to also get comfortable with their own feelings, for one, and get comfortable with the feelings that are evoked in the group, because writing in this way will evoke emotions. In every workshop I give face-to-face, when I'm in The Hague, etc., and the college instructors there are always tears. There is always laughter. We also do lots of dancing after lunch. You probably enjoy it. And but the important thing is that we really spend time on what is felt, what is being felt. Okay. All right. Now, we're going to revisit the question, the life question that has been following you around. All right. We have a very short time, I see, to do this. It's 11:45 at my time, 1:45 Eastern time. And so this is something I invite you to also continue at home. What I'd like you to do is to revisit your career question and to write it down again, because it may have evolved. So take a moment to do that. And see the question that you're writing down as a gift to yourself. Okay, so the question might have changed, and that's why I always ask everyone to revisit it, because as I've been speaking, things are percolating. Our unconscious mind works along with us. Unconscious mind is a profound source of creativity. Okay. Now, just choose a number between 1 and 4, whichever intuitively just jumps out at you. Okay, you got your number. You can write it down if you like. Now, and the next slide is going to be 4 images from the career card set I showed before. This is this is the career card set. It's 52 cards, and I've chosen 4 cards to share with you for this exercise. Now, you've picked one of the four numbers, so just take a look at the image on the card and maybe write a few notes about it. For instance, that is a red bird standing on a twig. He or she, well, it's that bird sort of seems poised, patient. Somebody else may say, oh, it looks like he's just about to fly away. Or somebody else might write, just like he looks like he just landed there. So whatever comes to mind for yourself, just based on this image. Now I'm going to invite you, when you've done the note-taking on the image and the first impressions the image brought up for you, is to write a dialogue as if this bird or this image of the monster, dragon, whatever we want to call it, with the person, is becoming your dialogue partner for your question. So say your question was, what is the next big career step for me? and you chose number 1 and you have the bird, you write down, okay, red bird. You say, red bird, what is the next step for me? What is the next step for me, red bird? And red bird will write back. So for one person, red bird will say, oh, just stay and just balance on the branch as it goes up and down. For the moment, the idea for you is to pause. Pause. Somebody else will write, it's about letting go of the security of the branch and just opening your wings a little bit more. So just allow the thoughts, and first thought, best thought. The Beat poets used to say that first thought, best thought. Allow the card to speak to you in writing. Write a dialogue. And you can keep going back and forth. But bird, I don't want to leave the steady branch. And then the bird will respond. Okay. Okay. Now each, I'm not going to use this now, we don't have the time, but the back of the cards, just to show you briefly what they look like. Here are the backs. You don't need the backs necessarily in a first workshop working with clients, but you can use them as they have themes and specific writing exercises on the back. So just to give you an idea what that is. So here's one example of career writing. It's a simple dialogical exercise that I wanted to introduce you to experience how might I interact with my own question? And how might I get out of myself and my normal patterns of thinking through creativity? Okay, here is the contact information for anybody. It's writingtheself.ca if you want to have a look at my website, or send me a question or message through my Athabasca email. And note that the Athabasca email is reinekke@athabascau.ca. So I thank you for all joining me, and I look forward to the questions. I think we have about 10 minutes I have to respond to some questions. Oh yes, where did I see Kello asks, where did I get these statistics? I can send that to you. Actually, they're in the PowerPoint presentation. I've mentioned some of the sources for that. I don't have them handy, but various reports from business and otherwise that that I looked at for that. So I can send you those resources. Writing versus typing, Carol Houchkur. I tend to encourage people to write by hand, and I do that in workshops as well. I believe that is a good way to engage with this process. That said, in my own writing life, I find poetry for me works best typed, and sometimes on my iPhone while I'm lying in bed in the evening, and the first lines seem to appear, and then I start typing those out. And that's a very good question, because I have this niggling feeling with the next generation that we will be having to answer this question, because people will be on their devices. But I encourage writing with a pen on the paper. Can you repeat the name of, oh yes, the research done in 2012 was through the Central Bureau of Statistics, the CBS, in the Netherlands. That's where that research came from. Yeah, the career cards are available. I have a European supplier, and also I supply them as well through my website. So you can look at writingtheself.ca if you're interested in that resource. And the next question I see is, can you repeat the referral you mentioned earlier about an approach to develop our reflective writing to avoid repeating ourselves? Yes, and that's proprioceptive writing. Proprioceptive writing. And I'm just typing it out here. I'm going to send it to all of you by Linda Metcalf and Tobin Simon was the original co-author. And that book is called Writing the Mind Alive. That's a great title. I'm going to send it to you all so you have it. Okay. And I have many resources on my website in the publications list, articles that many co-authored by Frans and myself about career writing, and gives examples, and there's one in the CERIC journal, the 2015 CERIC journal. One of those has a full article on career writing with examples from practice. So, you know, I recommend some reading for those interested. And we have always prided ourselves, in particular, I have always emphasized that I find that it's important that academic writing is accessible. And I believe our articles really are accessible and won't be sleep-inducing. So if there are articles that you see on my website and you do not have access to your university database to get those articles, please let me know, email me, and I can send you a selection. My policies, I send 2 or 3 at a time max. So please don't just copy and paste my whole publications list and say, can I have these, please? So just choose 2 or 3 that you think you will read, and I'll send those to you by email. So yeah, more questions are coming in, so I'm just going to look at those. Yeah. What kinds of students do and don't engage well with these creative exercises? I've worked mostly with adults. I did run a pilot with 7 young people between age 17 and 21, one who was severely dyslexic and really wrote a lot fewer words than others, and that worked for him as well. So far I found it has worked for every kind of student, though the products you might get are different. So if you're working with 16 to 20-year-olds, you might get, you might ask them to bring in song texts that they love and work from there as prompts for writing, and you might get 200 words instead of 800 words, depending on what you assign. I hope that answers that question. So a broad spectrum, but I mostly work with university students, university college instructors, and graduate students at the University of Athabasca here. Do you have any suggestions for working with someone who has no confidence, in their writing skills? I would start with texts that mean something to them. You know, like a quote out of a movie that they just love. A poem that maybe was read at their grandfather's funeral. Song texts that they love that they might work with. So start where they are. Start where they are and make it better. And you can also work with images and collages where you actually stick to a page and then start to tell stories based on those images. So you can get very creative with career writing. It need not fit into a particular stream which really only emphasizes words. You can use images as well. ESL students, again, is similar questions, ESL students. I also would recommend that for proprioceptive writing, that people write in their own language, that they write partly in their own native language. If you have ESL students and you are career counseling them, let their own language speak also. When I teach in the Netherlands, often the text will be in Dutch. I've had a Romanian student, a Spanish student. I don't understand Romanian nor Spanish. And so for me, and they would read out loud, even in sharing in the group, in their own language. It was okay that we didn't understand literally everything that was said and spoken. So please also go where they are and make it better. I think that's my advice for any of that. Go where they are and make it better. Has it worked with people with multiple barriers to employment? I have not done research on that. So I don't know. What are the tools and techniques you suggest to use when exploring career with clients if it is not obviously NOC or system or occupation program? What is the alternative to matching tools? I wouldn't say there's an alternative to matching tools. This is an enhancement. This is the personal exploration that would go prior to the matching tools that you could use more in more useful ways, just much like my life design, what Mark Savickas does when he does life portraits. Once there is that deeper exploration with the questions that he uses, then he looks at, okay, let's look at the RISEC, et cetera, and see where we can still do some matching. So see that particular piece as the more instrumental piece that is useful after the personal deeper explorations. Oh yes, okay. Somebody asks a more forceful question. What about clients who don't like writing at all? You know, career writing is not for everyone. So you may find that there's certain people that have such an aversion to writing that they don't even want to go there. And I would just make one caveat to that. School has destroyed a lot of our love of writing, and we can heal some of that when, for instance, say we use a card, you use a card with them, a career card with them, and do a dialogue first just verbally, and then maybe written down, and the poetic starts to emerge. And then sometimes some love of our connection to words is rekindled. So I'd like to say those two things. Career writing is not for everyone. Second, we can rekindle inspiration. Yeah, I use career cards in every course that I teach. I just wanted, there are 52 cards again. The images are all unique. They were just developed, the images are from, and actually made by a poet in Britain, Derek Sellon, and I've written all the exercises on the backs of each card. There is a reflection, a theme, and a writing exercise. So 52 cards and a booklet that includes a description of some of the statistics I also named in this. So the first half of this booklet that goes with the career cards explains why we would use, and after that, all the fun that we could have with the cards. So, all right. Yeah, I think we're out of time. I see that there's still questions. If your questions are really burning questions, please do email them to me, and I will do my best to get back to folks about that. So yes, ask me your most pressing question, and send it to me if you want to. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reinekke. It was lovely to see all the questions coming today again and throughout the course of this webinar series. So thank you all for your engagement today. And thank you, Reinekke, for your presentation today. It was really interesting to learn more on how you are using the narrative approach to help the people you work with and how you're using the cards. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Okay, thank you as well.
As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will email you a link to the recording of the 3 webinars of this webinar series, along with a copy of the presentation slide later today. Now you can learn more about the Career Theories and Model at Work book, including how you can get your own copy at ceric.cs/series. We are also in the process of organizing our next free webinar series featuring more authors from the book discussing about their theories. So watch for an announcement in these coming weeks, and don't forget to register to our newsletters at ceric.cs/webinars. Now, to continue your learning journey, I'm happy to say that the registration for our Connexus National Career Development Conference are open. So you can visit the Connexus website and benefit from the Super Saver registration until September the 4th. Finally, it's time for you to tell us what you think of this webinar today. So a short evaluation survey will pop up on your screen as soon as the webinar ends, and we really appreciate you completing it to provide us with your feedback. Now, let me thank you for joining us today and for some of you throughout the entire webinar series, and we hope to see you at another learning opportunity very soon. Have a great day. Until next time.